panel is Technology, What Do We Need to Know? Our presenters are David Malinowski, Language Technology and Research Specialist from the Center for Language Study from Yale, and Steve Welsh, Senior Program Manager, Distance Learning Language Resource Center, Columbia University, and they work together on the Columbia, Yale, Cornell Shared Course Initiative. And Mary Jo Wilson, who's been kind enough to agree to be on 2 panels today, the first to talk about their experiences on the technology side. She is Program Coordinator for the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thanks.
Thank you. So a big thank you to Rebecca and to Avery and to everyone else who's been part of putting this together. I think Steve and I are very, very excited to be here for the event and to be part of this conversation, and I think it really helps us to imagine too how we can pick up on strands from our own institutions too. Yale, I think as Kevin mentioned before, has been hosting the Nawat Summer Training Program for a number of years, planning on doing it this summer as well. We've been talking actually, I think, to Rebecca and others at Utah about possible distance learning technology collaborations, learning from some of the insights that we're gaining from our shared course project, and a number of other kind of initiatives in teaching pilot courses in some of the languages that we're speaking about today. My own linguistic background is somewhat different. I'm more in the East Asian side, and will be hopefully teaching Korean at Yale in the fall, so I'm very excited about that, but I'm learning a whole lot from you all. And our presentation here is titled "What Do You Need to Know?" and that's sort of the title of the title of our session. It might also be titled just as well, "What Do You Need to Ask?" And as we've look at the incredible diversity of different kind of experiences, needs, situations that are represented in the room, Steve and I will be speaking specifically from the kind of insights we've gained and want to share with you in a very practical way about what kinds of technology concerns and needs there are around various kinds of course sharing and distance teaching, with the understanding that what we have to offer will be part of a larger conversation. And so we'll move on and just I don't know if I need to say a whole lot more about what I am and where I come from, but in the terms of our project, the Shared Course Initiative, I'm located at Yale. I do research in the classroom and outside, coordinating things like OPIs, self-assessments, background surveys with students, doing participant observation in classrooms, classroom recording, some analysis in its early stages of the kind of discourse and learning and teaching in a way that classrooms are transforming under the kind of conditions that we're running the program in. That's one of the hats I wear at Yale. And I work a lot with Steve, who will introduce himself a little more, I think, here.
Unfortunately, in my role, I don't have the luxury of turning down any hats, so I have to wear a lot of hats. The hairs grow grayer every day. But it's a complex consortial collaboration. There's a lot of moving pieces there. Hello, Corey.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're just going to listen.
And so what I do is I do everything from coordinating the classroom technology itself to doing some of the room design, working with faculty to do development, training, and support, and working with the other staff, interfacing with Mellon. We'll talk a little bit about our partnership with Mellon and their kind of contribution to our consortium. So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes to make these kinds of courses work, at least on our end. Hopefully, part of the work we want to do is to try to streamline some of these processes, hopefully through the kinds of discussions that we're having today.
So you want to overview the talk?
Yeah, sure. So we were charged by Becky and Avery with kind of giving you guys empowering, I know that's kind of a cliched word, but to empowering you guys to leave today knowing a little bit more about what to ask for when you go back to your home campus. We're going to try to keep this on the level of the technology layman. We're not going to delve too far into jargon. There will be a couple things that we'll bring up. You should have this. I've got a couple extra copies up here if nobody has, and you'll see there's a link to our presentation here, and apparently we're recording, so you'll be able to reference these things later anyway. our contact info is there, and I just want to say that, feel free to reach out to us, while we're here, but also after we leave. Some of the things we're going to be covering today are the conferencing technologies themselves, and we're kind of splitting them up, into these increasingly kind of hard to distinguish kind of differences between hardware-based conferencing technologies and software-based conferencing technologies. These lines are becoming a little more blurred, and I think that's a good thing as hybrid environments become a lot more easy to work with, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Budgeting obviously was something that you guys wanted to be able to know a little bit about, and I do really want to emphasize the word ballpark, because there's a lot of variables in any of the figures that we'll be talking about. Some things are really dictated by the market, but some things are dictated by negotiations with vendors, and there's a lot of X factors in any of these figures. Beyond what we're putting onto a budget list or an invoice, there's these less tangible things about room design, and these are where these types of collaborations can really face a lot of challenges. It's the devil's often in the details with making these kinds of distance learning environments work well. And then it's not just about the video conferencing technologies themselves, but we're gonna delve into some of the things that already came up about how you administer the collaboration through LMSs or other ad hoc technology kind of configurations using Google Docs, et cetera. And then, talking about how to do whiteboarding, and then beyond the actual conferencing technologies that you use for the room-to-room collaborations, other solutions for doing group and pair work, et cetera. And then we'll try to kind of summarize some best practices for you guys to move forward with.
Super. And Steve and I will be bouncing back and forth a lot, filling in for each other too. But one of the things that should be said probably first of all is the shared course initiative, as we've called it, between the three campuses, Yale, Columbia, and Cornell, is a campus-to-campus model, a room-to-room model of sharing less commonly taught languages that has a lot of points in common with and some differences from some of the other kinds of things that are being done here among all of you. And this is a lot of other things, of course, going on our campuses, but in the late 2000s, and the consortium, an East Coast consortium for schools involving six or more universities, were speaking about the need for sharing courses. Our schools together offer somewhere around 100 languages, but they're always changing, moving, and disappearing. And Yale specifically, for instance, was wondering what it would do when a longtime Tamil instructor no longer was able to teach, and through this initiative, we're able to receive that course from Columbia. So it's an interinstitutional and very much a classroom-based model of sharing the less commonly taught languages between the three universities. Any other sort of very large-scale things we might want to say? It started in about 2011 was the first pilot teaching of courses via room-to-room video conferencing, and following that and the receipt of a grant from the Mellon Foundation of around $1.2 million for 2 years. That's then been extended for the 3-year period, and we're in the final year of that right now. Enabled the institutional support to be created, the rooms to be outfitted for room-to-room video conferencing, and for the kind of institutional, faculty, technological, and other logistical support that we've needed to negotiate the relationship between the three. It's about people. We're here to talk about technology, but really it takes this many people and more, many more, to actually make this happen. This picture is from Columbia last May, where we have we had a rotating annual 2 or 3 day training workshop where all of the faculty on the three campuses, the administrators, the IT support folks, and just as of last year, graduate students who are starting to be trained in how to teach via distance in this way are also participating and creating community and sharing best practices and doing some focus training where we try to leverage the experience of those who have been teaching in these classrooms for 1, 2, 3 or more years with those who are just starting it for the first time. And it's always a changing cast of characters here. So shall we?
Yeah. Preparing for this conference or this workshop made me no, go ahead. Keep on. Yeah. Made me realize in particular that although we're increasing our offerings, we have a dearth of Latin American languages that we're sharing, and,
exactly.
and that's because in part at least, some of these Latin American languages that we're talking about today are offered on our local campuses. So there hasn't been a confluence of needs and the ability to meet those needs by the other campuses, so that we are already sharing some of these Latin American languages. But it's something that definitely made me think, wow, we're
It certainly is,
Yeah.
and you made that point very, very well. And I think that's to some degree reflected here, and but also these there are a number of initiatives outside of this particular collaboration too that we might talk about later. So in 2012 was the first grant-funded year of the project. We had these 7 languages that were shared between campuses, and the number stayed fairly similar for the next year, with some rotation among the languages that were offered. And then the last 2 years, last year and this year, we've seen the number grow, as Steve was mentioning a little bit earlier, to about 18 different languages. Tibetan, for instance, both classical and modern, taught by separate faculty members and separate student groups, for instance. And so this here is the current year of offerings. And so both Steve and I are working with the faculty and supporting the technological, pedagogical, and Steve, of course, with all of his hats, many more aspects of their work together. So just real quickly, too, now we go on to start talking about technologies and how this particular configuration has been working for us, and where our points of need are for thinking more about what directions to go in the future with changes. We see a classroom typically looking something like this. Sam is our Tamil instructor who's based at Columbia, who's teaching a class at 2 campuses here in this picture. He's standing in between 2 groups of students, one located physically in the classroom there at Columbia, or sort of arranged in a semicircle so that they can all see each other in the physical space that they're in. They can all see him, and they can all see each other on the screen as well. And the counterpart class is on the screen on the right. The screen on the left is an interactive whiteboard that's used for sharing content between the classes. So its content, what the students in the Columbia room there see on the left screen, varies quite a bit. Sam, the teacher, might pull up a whiteboard where he could use a stylus or his finger to give writing examples and lead activities, or write down vocabulary, for instance, that's being brought into the group's focal attention. He might also share other kind of content, go into the course management system, show a web page, do any other thing he'd like to do with that screen there. He is able, in his position, to navigate these 2 spaces and to help coordinate attention. Of course, anyone can talk to anyone, and anyone can see, ideally, anyone's not only active linguistic, verbal or paraverbal participation in the class, but also the kinds of things that students might do even when they're not the ratified speaker in the class, motioning, gesturing, responding, and so on. So one of the big questions and issues that this project and this kind of classroom configuration raises is not only how do students learn from their teacher, but how do students learn from each other in a shared course or distance learning environment. And the kind of technologies that we have and we struggle with and we're working with really do enable a fluid kind of continuum and disjunctured kind of number of ways of interacting. This here is another course from the Shared Course Initiative, a picture taken last December, just a few months ago at Yale, in a course that's taught, it's a Polish course, an advanced Polish course, a very small scale one, where there are 2 students in the Yale classroom where I took this picture. The instructor is located off camera to the right. And the Columbia student is right now seated, but sometimes standing, as they practice a skit that they enact in real time using various forms of other media as well to sustain their interaction. You can see that the Yale student isn't looking at the Columbia student at this time. She's looking at the collaboratively written lines of a skit that they are running through. The Yale student who's standing kind of stooped over there is engaged in this gesturing on the phone as a sort of a prop for this activity. He actually calls the student at Columbia for the ring as part of their skit. And so you see with the control surface sort of here in the lower right part of the screen that the students and the instructor use to move the cameras on either side, to change what they can see, to raise and lower the volume, to mute and unmute the classrooms and do other kinds of control. That students have some control in this classroom setting. The instructor as well has control over the sort of what they see, how much they see, and so on and so forth. So behind the Yale student here on the right as well is an interactive whiteboard that's not being used, but in this class they did use it as well for real-time live feedback on student writing, for instance, and annotating it with, and let's just do that too. Annotating it so that, in this case here, what's brought to the foreground in the interaction is the textual artifact that's being focused upon, and not necessarily the large images of the interactants, right? So that these various types of screens and their sizes can be manipulated fairly fluently. The whiteboard as well here is being written on quite a bit. So the classroom to classroom model that we're working with right now, and the technologies for which Steve is going to go through in a little more detail in a minute, has these kinds of traits with it. The interactivity and communication and flexibility is not just the question of being able to put what you want to put on a screen and being able to hear each other and see each other simultaneously, but also to have multiple channels of communication going on at the same time, to have maybe an ambient classroom to classroom connection that's in the background while students use iPads or phones or printed out documents to do other kind of focused work, pair work, for instance, Skyping with a partner on another campus while the room-to-room connection is running as well. So that the room-to-room model, we think, affords this kind of flexibility that we're still sort of struggling to wrap our heads around too, how to make it best and how to maximize the potential right there. So that's pretty much all I'll say, and Steve will just take over with the technology-focused.
I'm actually going to go back here for a quick second, just to isolate some of the major elements that we're talking about here. So we're talking about technology. What does that mean? What does technology mean? So in terms of the actual things that we're going to be purchasing and situating in the room, we're talking about screens. We're talking about a camera. We're talking about a microphone or multiple microphones. We're talking about speakers and the placement thereof. We're talking about furniture, and then we're thinking about where the bodies are in that room in relation to all of those other elements, right? So that's it. That's what room design consists of. So let's talk about the actual components therein. So like I mentioned earlier, we're still kind of thinking about, or we're dividing these technologies, and as you see on this thing here, I'm talking about IP-based conferencing platforms versus software-based platforms. And you'll see these names, these are the major players in the hardware-based technologies, Polycom, Lifesize, Cisco. And these things have been around for decades. These are the things that people were using, when you hear about Tandberg, et cetera, that was kind of folded up into Cisco. And this is the way that a lot of these telecollaborations have been conducted since, I think, the 80s even, if I'm not mistaken, if not the 90s. And then we've started integrating what we're calling bridge technologies, but they're the platforms that you've heard people already referring to, BlueJeans and Zoom. And those are definitely what I would consider best in breed when it comes to the software-based options. I think I've already heard from a number of people, and you're going to hear this the more that you talk about these things, Skype is not reliable. It does not work well. Do not do it if you can avoid it. Invest the money if you can, because it's going to result in a much more stable learning environment for your students and your instructors. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these things. I'm not going to do too much of this, but I do want you to know that when you're talking with tech people, if any of these words come up, this is what they're talking about: a codec. A codec is tied to these types of devices. It is also a malleable term that can mean a number of things, like that does refer to types of transcoding software. But codecs are going to be codecs, endpoint. These are the terms that people are going to use to talk about the hardware itself. And when you're buying a codec, what you're talking about is buying the actual machinery, piece of machinery that's going to fit into a rack unit, and it's often going to be bundled with the camera itself. And those things for Cisco's, these things will start to add up in prices, and this is why you might want to do a cost-benefit analysis about whether you can really, whether you want to go high-end or whether you want to go middle. But I would advise against going low. So these things are going to come with a microphone, some kind of remote interface for adjusting the cameras, adjusting the volume, starting and ending calls. And just to show at hands, how many of you have actually kind of used this video conferencing technology that I'm talking about, right? So you have a remote that you're using to move the camera around, and you can change the interface of what you're seeing, and this will be paired with a computer, whether that's Mac or Windows, et cetera, so that you can bring up the presentation and share that content. So these are all the elements of kind of setting up a room using these more conventional, traditional, industry standard, IP-based video conferencing technologies. They're worth the investment in that they're easy to use, they're reliable, and it's easy to get support for them from a reputable AV vendor that's going to be local. So if we talk about the different ways that these kind of learning environments are designed, again, with show of hands, how many of you have taken an online course where your experience has been something like looking at a screen on the left? I've taken plenty of courses in my own graduate work using Adobe Connect, for instance, which is what this is a screenshot of here. And I've found that experience, and I'd love to hear about your own experiences with this, but I found that to be a very isolating experience. There's a lot of lag. The way that people hear and interface with each other is very stilted and very. There's a lot of stuttering. There's a lot of dropped signals, dropped frames, and the flow of conversation can often be very, very disrupted by these technologies. And there's all these kind of superficial, peripheral kind of ways of signaling and back channeling, raising a hand, and all these other signifiers for, hey, I want to contribute something. When can you let me speak? So this is, for a class where you have 100 students. I mean, there's definitely advantages to using this, what I call atomized models, where you're seeing a lot of tiles on a screen. But we, in our own consortium, we really, really privilege the notion of a room-to-room collaboration. The less cameras involved, the better, right, is the way we're thinking about it. So we have up to 3 participants. I think actually we have up to 4 participants in certain circumstances. And I've already heard a couple instances where I think CIC was saying you've had 5 sites participating in a single course, right? So the less kind of faces on a screen that are separated from each other, I think the better. If you can get this to be a room-to-room model, it adds a lot more continuity to the experience for the students. This is a bunch of logos about which conferencing technologies I'm referring to, but these are all of the major players in the field that you're going to hear about: Microsoft Link, WebEx, Google Hangouts, Big Blue Button, etc. And then over here are the conferencing technologies that we're talking about and we've kind of committed to. These are what I frame as the advantages. You're going to get a much truer signal. It's going to be a lot easier to interact fluidly with a minimal time lag and a much more kind of true high-resolution image. It's a lot easier to get maintenance and support for these platforms, and I talk about the minimization of X factors. What do I mean by that? How many of us have actually incorporated a student that's or an instructor that's maybe has a shaky internet connection and is using Skype from over a wireless connection in a place where they don't have much bandwidth? When you start adding those on top of each other, and you have 4 or 5 students that are participating over wireless using a low resolution webcam, it can really degrade the experience and hinder the ability to conduct a communicative language exercise. So these are the advantages that we see to really kind of sticking with a room-to-room model wherever possible. And we're not prescribing these as the exclusive solutions for designing this type of environment, but these are the ones that we would strongly recommend at this time. And things are evolving rapidly. So if we have this conversation next year, you could probably see a couple other logos on there.
And a couple fewer.
But what's happening now in the past 2 years, I would say, is the promises of these software-based models to really work well and integrate into the other types of environments has really come a long way. So you don't have to all be on the same platform. If you have somebody who's been using a Polycom or a Cisco, old school high-end video conferencing platform, and you have that at, say, UCLA, and then at Brigham Young or some other institution, you're using Blue Jeans. You can make these things work together well now. So it doesn't have to be everybody buying the same stuff. And I think that offers a great deal of flexibility that wasn't there even just a few years ago. So that's a great thing. Just make sure before you commit to those technologies that you're talking with your partners and you, as much as possible, conduct some pilots, because especially with the software-based technologies like Blue Jeans and Zoom, those sales reps are hungry. They want your business, and they'll bend over backwards to kind of indulge you in a lot of extensive testing. So take advantage of that if you're thinking about doing that. Right, here we go, the numbers. Again, I really have to emphasize that this is going to vary greatly depending on who you're talking to. But I'm giving you rough estimates. This is somewhat based on our own experience and what we've kind of shelled out in the past, and also doing some panic Googling before this and making sure that these numbers are still kind of accurate. But we've migrated, at least at Columbia, and remember, we have 3 very different environments between the 3 schools. We're not all on the same platforms either, and we're not all buying the same technology. But what I've kind of gravitated to in the past couple iterative upgrades that we've done is I really like what LifeSize offers. It's a low cost and a really well-designed product. Some of the things you have to think about are who's hosting calls, and do you need a multi-site license? So if you have 4 or 5 people participating, you got to make sure that you're able to support that. And some of these things allow for that, and some of them don't. So those are some of the factors that you have to think about. I am becoming a lot more of a convert, if you will. I don't want to speak too preemptively, but if I were starting from scratch today, I would really, really think about committing to Blue Jeans and Zoom with, and this is the big caveat, with high-end cameras and microphones and a really good acoustic design for the room. So this is a ballpark estimate, but that's not all. But wait, there's more. You have to think about the displays. You need to have really big displays in the classroom whenever your room affords you that option. And if you can go dual display, do it, because you'll use the real estate, and it will be helpful for your students and your instructor to be able to see what they would normally be looking at in their classroom on one screen, and then to be able to easily kind of interact with the other partners on an adjacent screen. And as you saw in our room design, having a camera in the middle of those 2 screens is probably a really good design. We talk about PTZ cameras, that's pan, tilt, zoom, and don't go bargain basement, because it's going to make a big difference. The higher resolution you can get, the better, because you need to see people's mouths move while they're speaking. There's a lot, we've heard that time and again from instructors, that if the resolution's not great, they don't feel like they can really grasp what's happening with their students. And beyond what you buy, making sure that the actual design of where you're putting the speakers and the microphones in the room is effective, so that everybody can participate, hear each other, and speak and contribute legibly, so to speak. And then, after that, you're still going to have to pay the AV vendor for installation and service, and that's an important consideration. I can't give you an estimate of what that's going to be, but if you want to back channel with me while you're going through this process and ask, hey, am I being swindled right now? I'll do my best to give you a check on that, But these things are going to vary greatly depending on your vendor. Like I was saying about the intangibles, carpeting makes a big difference. If you have bangy, boomy surfaces, you're gonna hear a lot of the room, and that's a bad thing. You never want to hear the room. You just want to hear the speakers. You don't want to hear the air conditioning. You don't want to hear the fluorescent lights. You want to hear the speaker and nothing else. Scanners and printers, you want to think about going paperless, or at least you want to think about how they're going to be exchanging printed material across distance. Some students feel real comfortable taking pictures and sending PDFs to their instructors. For some of our instructors, we have to do a very resource-intensive scanning, grading, rescanning and emailing to the student. So that's another kind of, the materiality of paper and written work is still a concern, especially in non-Roman script languages for the first couple of years. Then, we'll talk a little bit about, using these kind of supporting technologies like mobile devices, tablet devices in the classroom. And if you want to supply that for the students for guided activities, that's an additional cost. We at each of our 3 sites, we bought 10 iPads just to facilitate the kinds of scripting exercises and collaborative pair and group work. And we're using them, but we're not solely dependent on them. We could probably do BYOD if we wanted to. Is everybody familiar with that term, bring your own device? So, I mean, I know a lot of us have these, and a lot of what we do, we could maybe do with the student's own technology. So that's something to consider. And you might have to update, the technology that's already in the classroom. And then those little odds and ends add up. If anybody's done a high-end audio-video redesign of a room, the things that end up being expensive are all the cables. So I tried to spec out an example room cost for you if you were starting from scratch and you had a budget. This is about what I would expect a good room like the ones that we would try to design are. If we were starting tomorrow to reproduce one of our own environments that we have right now, we'd probably be going with something like this. And again, I do really need to emphasize that this is ballpark. So you might find some variance if you start doing these yourselves, but I would say $25K is a solid, safe allocation for a new room.
I noticed the chairs on there as a budget item too.
And it makes a big difference. I don't see any jaws on the floor, which I think is a good thing. That's good. This is not shocking, right? All right, good. If I were to try to say, okay, we're self-funding, we're going to do a bake sale, and we're going to try to make this work however I have to, this would be the absolute lowest that I think I could make something work with. And I can't guarantee how great it would be, but it would work. And as long as we're making the most of what's in the room, in terms of where everything's located, we could hopefully support a classroom on this kind of budget as well. But I definitely couldn't make something work for less than that. So once you have all these things that you've bought, what do you do with them? Where do you put them? What else do we need to think about? I bring this book up a lot. This is 10 years old at this point, but it asked a lot of good questions that apply to the distance classroom as well as the conventional, traditional teaching space. So you have to think about. I think I've touched on a lot of these already, but we in addition to our whiteboards, our digital whiteboards, in each of our rooms at Columbia, we have a physical wall, a whiteboard wall, so that they can. Some instructors still really need the palpable feeling of writing on a chalkboard kind of thing. The kinesthetic experience.
Yeah, I'd also recommend that the International Association for Language Learning Technology, IALT, IALLT, has a number of resources around room design, specifically focused a lot on language sensors, but a lot of those are quite applicable in some cases. Felix Cronenberg is the name to look for in that regard.
So this is what they look like. These are just 4 of our 12 rooms, and you can see here everything's on casters. Things can be moved pretty easily. Each of the rooms, well, 3 of the 4 rooms I'm showing you here have dual displays. And actually, truth be told, there's a number of other displays in some of these rooms that you're not seeing that are off camera. But you can see right here how the design of the room is actually dictating a lot of the dynamic. The students are sitting in a place that's easy to be seen on the camera. There's definitely kind of when there's a single screen, we prefer the camera to be on top of it. It's awkward to look down. But these are things that you just kind of you learn through time what the best dynamic is. But these are some of the rooms that we use most commonly in our courses. While I have this slide up, does anybody have any questions? We'll do a full Q&A, but good. All right. Yeah, I think we're going to have to wrap up pretty quickly the rest of this.
So I'll just say a few words that as has been mentioned a few times already, the learning management system and the connection to the registrar's office and the sort of peripheral outside of the classroom technologies are definitely a question that needs to be thought about. And in the shared course initiative so far, students generally have participated in the sending or the host institution's learning management system. So Columbia runs an open source Sakai-based learning management system called Courseworks. Yale has a different looking and slightly different functioning Sakai-based learning management system called Classes V2. Cornell is using Blackboard, and they're all thinking about making changes or in the process of making changes. Columbia is switching over to Canvas, and language courses, I think, are scheduled maybe next year or so to be starting to run classes on Canvas. Yale as well is changing over to this platform. So one of the things that we've been doing as well, and some of the students might say that it's also part of the experience of having taken a course at, or at least half at, another campus to participate as a student would in the learning management system on the other side. However, Yale has also started to make courses available for the SCI via Canvas. So we've been not only encouraging and supporting faculty to use and learn to use Canvas to teach their classes. I do support with faculty at Cornell, for instance, who are unfamiliar with it, but also to use it ourselves as a means of communication, of document sharing, of archiving, of research coordination, and these kind of things with different Canvas sites as well. So it's sort of an unseen background technology in many cases that sustains the project. Steve will say a few things about using mobile devices for pair work.
Yeah, we found some of the most common dynamics that we're trying to facilitate are how students can, do their script exercises from the remote site. We use the term sending and receiving. You guys use host and receiving, right? We send and receive. So we want to make sure that when, at the receiving institution, we can see students practicing their TOML script, for instance. But we also want to facilitate pair work, and the way that we're doing that is really, it's pretty, it's not that ingenious. We just have students using iPads and connecting over Skype or another conferencing technology, and either using headphones or not using headphones, but so that we can have a much more multinodal person-to-person dynamic during the classroom, the way that you would conduct a face-to-face classroom. And like I said before, we're open to students using their own devices if that's what they prefer. Whatever gets the job done with minimal kind of disruption, really, is what we're striving for. I think we already mentioned the kind of the importance of digital whiteboards for facilitating a lot of the annotation and kind of and script production. We're going to kind of try to zoom through these last few slides. These are things after you've kind of committed to your technologies, you're not going to be able to implement these things by yourselves. I'm sure that you guys are already aware that it takes a village, and there's a lot of inhabitants of that village, chieftains in different domains, etc. So the networking, the people that are actually in the rooms, if that's not going to be you, is that person ready to support things or know who to talk to when there's a break-fix situation? There will be bumps in the road. And so just making sure that there's somebody there who knows what they're doing when something goes wrong, or at least knows who to call, is really important. A number of us have already brought up this notion of how you do course listings and how you do classroom scheduling, how you do grading, et cetera. And this starts to bleed over into the administrative elements. But it's really hard to discern discrete categories between technology and administration for some of these things. So having that in place early on, knowing how the remote students are going to access the sending course management environment is very important.
Oh. So lest we have given the impression that to be quite eloquent and sophisticated about it, this is the equation you think that we're actually speaking about. In fact, no, we really are not trying to draw this kind of correlation. Our graph looks a little bit more like this, and I think Rebecca really started it off early, and just thinking about all of the different conditions. We can't really talk about technology without considering all of these other kinds of questions and more. Perhaps, the mandate, the institutional mandate negotiated between, in a very emergent fashion, between schools, institutions, the scale, number of languages, number of students on either side, all highly variable and changing too, not fixed. And so I think thinking about a lot of these kind of things separately and plotting them out, as Steve was just saying, will help our own and hopefully your own capacity to really support these kind of initiatives, but also thinking about working with the Centers for Teaching and Learning and other spaces on your campuses where perhaps these some courses will be able to be hosted, where they are already making decisions or will be making decisions about how to configure rooms and spaces and scheduling and these kinds of things too. So we really are wanting to connect our technology conversation to the conversation we've just had in the previous session and the ones that are coming up this afternoon and tomorrow. Steve, you want to say a few words here, or are we pretty much?
Yeah, I think we're done. This presentation is available easily. You guys can pull it up yourselves. I have a couple of just kind of summary slides here, and some of them are already iterated on the handout itself. These are just reiterating some of the things I already said. And then I've got a little Pandora's box slide here with lots of questions that we won't be able to answer before or maybe hopefully we'll be able to know how to answer it a little better by the end of the workshop. But I'm sure that every one of these questions is going to come up in subsequent sessions while we're here for the next couple days.
I would say, just as we say thank you too, that we have a unique opportunity and maybe even a responsibility, I feel, as language educators to help define what it means when campuses define and discuss distance learning, because so often we see that it's done in a paradigm of delivery of education as if it is a product that is to be delivered like a pill in a box or something like this. But the language teaching where we've come over the last decades, and specifically with communicative methods that obviously Steve and I are trying to think about how to enable multi-channel, multi-party, multimodal kinds of interactions in our classrooms, are not necessarily represented in our campuses' thinking, nor in the choices that are being made by those who are buying and technology and configuring rooms. So to the extent that we can also become advocates for a more holistic and inclusive kind of technological posture on our campuses, that would be a really nice thing too. So thank you. We're talking ideals, right? I mean, it is. Thank you so much. Thank you.
While I'm doing this, switching around, hear that last remark. I was at a.
Do you want to, maybe sitting here is probably better than sitting to the side?
At oh, sure. A bunch of presentations about distance education not too long ago, and it was completely that. I felt like I was on a different planet. It was completely that. The students will get their deliverables, and
Right.
What Paulo Freire calls the banking.
Oh, it was awful. And it's just so different from language teaching, as I know it anyway. So, good morning. So I was asked to come here in my role as a coordinator of a summer intensive language program for Southeast Asian languages. So this program, the Southeast Asian Studies Summer Institute, has been around for more than 30 years, and it's primarily a summer institute. Students come from all over the country to study. Now it was 9, but now 8 different languages that are listed there at first, second, and third year levels. So that program's been going on a long time. I've been the program coordinator for 17 years now of it. And forever, as long as I've been doing this, I would get calls from people saying, gosh, I would love to come and study whatever, one of these languages, but I just can't, I've got a responsibilities, it's usually something like a sick relative that I'm responsible for taking care of, or I've got an afternoon job or something where they just can't leave their situation and come. So come to Wisconsin to be a summer student for 8 or 9 weeks in the summer. So I've been fielding those calls forever. And so what I've done in the last 5-6 years now is try very gradually to incorporate distant students from wherever they are into our summer intensive language programs. I'm going to also give a presentation this afternoon. So what I'm going to focus on this morning is just sort of the technology part of it. There's a whole other administrative part, lots of different administrative questions, and so I'm going to leave that for the afternoon, okay? So rather than an institution-to-institution model, CIASI's mandate is to serve the nation for Southeast Asian language instruction. It's for academic credit. You know, students, it's a pretty, you know, standard sort of summer intensive model where students are coming for a whole academic year's worth of language instruction just for the summer. We try, like you guys and like all of you, to make it a communicative, very participatory kind of learning environment. Classes tend to be quite small, so our average is about 6 students per class, can go up to 10 or 11 students. We've never had 20 students in a class. We never will, I don't think. But it's very much you know, students and teachers interacting. It's very much a learning community, and not just the classroom, but because it's a summer intensive program, you know, there's some elements of sort of a summer camp in a way of just, you know, there's lecture series, there's films, there's other kinds of things where students from Burmese and Vietnamese and Thai can interact with each other. So just a couple of slides, you know, so activities that are very common in our classes of just, you know, people being up and around and moving, working, like this one is, you know, the students are practicing, the teacher is holding the elbow of the student who's blindfolded. They're just practicing directions. So the students there are saying, you know, turn left, turn right, get down the path. But it's just, these are very common sort of classroom shots that we would have at any given time. So in terms of trying to incorporate distance students, we have very, very limited access to the kind of classroom-to-classroom technology. So we have some access at our campus in any given summer. I might have access to 1 or 2 of those classrooms, but I might have 8 or 9 or 10 distant students. So, and the distant students might be, you know, 1 in Burmese first year and you know, 1 in second year Filipino and somebody in third year Indonesian or something like that. So they're scattered around the different classes. So we do, as you guys have said, and it's absolutely true, you know, the video conferencing, like with Polycom equipment, is by far the best. But I don't have access to lots of that. And I didn't want to turn away students if I didn't have to. So a lot of what I've done is try to bring students via iPad into a classroom. There's a lot of, I'll go through some of the work involved in making that work because it doesn't have as good of quality. We have had some experience with where everybody is on that sort of atomized, we were using Adobe Connect at one point, but not with 12 or 13 students. It was just 4 or 5. So, you know, it can work in if it takes a lot of work to make it work. So, you know, here's a Thai classroom. The only time that because I have such limited access to these kinds of classes, the only time that I try to use this kind of a classroom is when I've got more than 1 student at different locations. So in this class, there's a Thai language class where there was 1 student in California and somebody else in Boston, you know, so that all the students could see and hear each other. Most of the time, this is what we're using. So you know, it's a student on a tripod with an iPad. The distant student has to have a wired computer on the distant student's end, because the iPad by definition is wireless, right? So that already makes it slow. So it just doesn't work if the student on the other end is also trying to be wireless. So we do a lot of work beforehand to make sure that we can make the connection as quick as fast as possible. So, you know, we have a student in the Vietnamese class. I'm just going to show a few other slides just to try to illustrate that with this kind of technology, we can accommodate, you know, one distant student into a classroom in a way that still feels very communicative. It feels very, the student can be up and moving and interacting. It gets to feel very natural within the classroom. Before I do that, I guess, so this was one where, we just had, so if you see a student, an instructor, 2 other students, that's Adobe Connect, I think. Maybe it's Blackboard. Anyway, the UW switched over to Blackboard a few years ago. So that can work, and we've used it a few times. More often it's something like this, where so there's a distant student, they're doing a mock election kind of a thing in a Khmer classroom. So she's up there, presenting with the other students. They're learning a greeting custom, but the distant student is very much up and around, moving with everybody else. It takes, with a small language classroom, it takes preparation and willingness of the students who are local to also bring the distant student in and help, scooch the tripod around or whatever to make sure that person can see and hear and interact. We've had some resistance from some students. It's not universally loved, but overall, it's, most students say it's better to have more students. It's better to have more classmates than those who are put off by it. A couple of others. Here's a poetry reading for students studying Lao, and in this case, the distant student was in London. Most of our distant students have been within the continental United States, but so far, we've had one from London. We had one student in Israel. And one in Alaska, which again was sort of a time difference because he was 3 hours behind. So he started his class at 5 in the morning. But can it work? Sure, it can work. Just a few other slides. We've had visitors to the classrooms, etc. I think that's it for slides. Oh, no, one more. So again, a skit where this is in front of a combined all institute kind of a thing. So the distant student is participating in the skit along with students who are there in Madison. So anyway, in terms of how does it work, what I do with some student assistance is I send out anybody who expresses interest in being a distant student. I send out a bunch of information to them, mainly making sure that they understand. I think there's a expectation from students, oh, it's online. That means I can do it at my own time. I can do it in my pajamas. I can do whatever. So I send out a bunch of information saying, no, it's participatory, it's synchronous. You have to be there at the same time as everybody else, expected to be as prepared and dressed the same way and whatever as everybody else. Half of them never call me back then, which is great. I mean, if they weren't expecting to be a serious student, it's not the appropriate program for them, right? A couple months before the summer classes start, then I work out a list of who does seem to be genuinely interested, and then I have students, test out the iPads in the classroom where I think they're going to be, and make sure that that the connections work fast enough. And so, if their computer speed, and I have the students, they're just chatting or whatever, but I have my helper take down notes. Did the video signal freeze up? Did the audio signal sound choppy? How many times? What can we do to fix it? So that by the time summer instruction starts, there's a minimal classroom time being spent on, can you see me now? Can you hear me now? Because that absolutely just kills a class.
Although we've kind of flirted with the idea of making that into a linguistic exercise, and giving them like a little lexicon of these terms early on in the semester, so that they know how to negotiate these things in the target language, which becomes its own thing.
Yeah, it can become its own thing. That's a great idea. And then when there are, the only insurmountable problem that I had was there's a couple summers ago, like the second day of classes, it was very early on, there's a huge lightning storm, power outage over half the campus. You know, that's insurmountable. I couldn't do anything about that. Yeah. But for most of the time, I have most of our classes are in 2 separate buildings on campus. So I have 2 student assistants who are available during class periods to just go help with technological stuff. So the distance students in the humanities building have the cell phone number for my helper, who, you know, so if the distance student is saying, hey, I can't see, or the connection isn't working, I try to take the burden off the teacher and off the other students for that kind of stuff and have somebody to go help. Anyway. So yes, it's more work. It costs me a little, you know, more in terms of student assistance to make this work. But it helps to, right now, about, you know, these are not huge classes. It's not the overall institute census each summer is around 110, 120 students. So if we get 10 or 12 students as distance students, that's 10% of our, you know, student population. It makes it a little more possible for a few more people. Am I making this sound small enough? A little more possible for a few more people to do this. One thing I haven't really heard brought up here much is as we've been doing this with our instructors, that's been a huge negotiation too. You know, the instructors are, you know, and understandably, like, hey, I've already got this classroom full of students here. Now you're going to ask me to do all this other stuff too. So it is more work for instructors, and I don't think. I mean, I've certainly heard conversations between instructors and some of the other administrators, whatever, trying to sugarcoat that. Don't sugarcoat it. You know, it is more work, and it's more work in terms of having to, you know, upload everything to, you know, cloud storage so that students can download it. It's more work to try to figure out file management. It's more work for, you know, and a lot of this from our point of view has been, you know, learning by doing, so to speak. So, you know, times when students would upload their homework file over their completed homework file over the blank homework file, whatever, and, you know, so then things are copied over. So anyway, I won't go into huge amounts of detail, but it does take more time, and it's more work for instructors. And then the other thing that I've heard from instructors is that because there's a distance student that they've had to you know, get everything in order for the distance student, then it makes it less flexible if they want to spend extra time on something. It's just harder to manage those, you know, minute-to-minute decisions within a class. To say, oh, actually, no, you know, because the distance student will have access to the handouts, and you can't stop them from having access to the handouts for that day. So if they have access to something, you have to make sure that all the students have access to it. So I just wanted to put up here, this is something that we've, again, learned over time that we send out now. It was our Khmer language coordinator composed this, but it's something now we send out to our students, to the distance students. So I can just read it through. But it addresses the feeling that the distance students are going to have at some point of feeling left out from the rest of the class. You know, the other students, you know, had a barbecue over the weekend and are talking about it on Monday morning, or the other students are, you know, getting to go on a field trip and the distance student isn't. And so I try to encourage students, if they can at all be in Madison, it's certainly preferable because you do have the hangout time and the time to just make more personal connection with your fellow classmates. But if it's not, at least this helps, I think, prepare students a little bit more for that feeling. With these small classes, it's very, it's if you don't pay attention to this stuff, it will affect the classroom. So I just put in a few slides with how students react to it, and we've had to solve some problems over the summers, but I think most of the distance students have really appreciated the opportunity because they know that, they would not have this opportunity otherwise. So they've really been, for the most part, troopers in terms of going the extra mile to make sure that they're interacting with the class and doing what they need to do to be part of the class. And the students in the classroom, some of them have had a little sort of initial bumpiness to it, but basically most of the students in the class, because the classes are so small, once you kind of get over the technology, they've really embraced their classmates as well and made it a very I think overall it's been good for most students, I guess. So anyway, these bullet points are just, I've pulled out our student evaluations just in selected student feedback. I don't know if I should wait a little bit or I can send these out to people if you want, but I guess from my point of view, it's because the classes are so small, and because I'm in this situation where I can't, it's not an institution to institution thing, I have to be able to respond to needs on a national level for less commonly taught languages. I'm finding over the last 4 or 5 years that it's certainly worth it, from my point of view, to do it this way. And the teachers, I think, also have been really great about being willing to learn more about this, and the teachers, have exchanged notes and best practices with each other. So I don't know. I think as long as everybody goes into it with the idea that it's going to be more work, but it means that you're going to have more students and that you're going to, have a broader impact in terms of your ability to reach out to more people, gradually it's working. So, I don't know. That's that.
All right, so let's open it up for questions. Again, questions and comments. Beatrice.
So thank you to all. Really great. I wish I had had this when I was trying to communicate between CIE staff at my university and another university. I think one of the things that I found for some of our programs was that the technology existed on campus. It was my ability to get to it and to understand the language that I needed to use in order to help the two campuses communicate with each other. So this would have been very helpful. And it's great. Mary Jo, I was wondering if you were willing to share the information that you hand out to students. I think that what to expect is
Sure.
so important,
Sure.
and you cover so much of it
Mhm.
in your talk. It would be great.
Sure. Happy to.
We have a little document that we hand out. We call it a handbook, but it's
Okay.
really a one-sheeter. That
That would
just
be great.
that just sets those expectations for the students on the first day and says, hey, you know, you're going to be in a room alone. But something that we do that not everybody can do because of geographical proximity is we don't obligate, but we expect that our instructors will visit the remote campus at least once per semester, and that serves to kind of fill in some of the social kind of presence.
That's great. Yeah, so we would love, I think we would all love to see those types of documents.
One,
We grab from them.
sure. One of the things that I forgot to mention, and when I have my students, you know, I mean, I say in some, that I give to students beforehand that it's the distance students' obligation. Many of them do want to study, participate from home, which is okay if, there's several ifs, right? So I lay these out in a thing that I send to them, and then I have my student, as they're doing their tests, make sure that this is working. So not only do the connections, computer speed and internet speed have to be fast enough, but the student, whether they're going to be distant student, whether they're going to be participating from their, you know, their home institution, like a learning language lab, or from their actual apartment or something, they have to create a classroom-like environment for themselves. So no roommate doing dishes down the hall, you know. And also things like you were talking about with you know, buzzing lights, or occasionally, you know, if somebody's living near a busy highway, if you can hear trucks rumbling in the background. So if my student assistant can hear that sort of stuff, or there's noise in the background or something, again, we deal with that before class begins.
And one of the issues that we have encountered is when it's actually one of our co-instructors who are abroad.
Mm-hmm.
So if the co-instructor, and often we have to use Skype because that's the technology, the software that we have available. But you know, there might be roosters in the background, and there might be all kinds of other
Tree frogs.
Tree frog, yeah.
So we build
Cicadas.
it into the lesson, kind of what you were saying.
Mhm.
That's really the only option we have.
Sure.
open to us.
Yeah, you have it gives you all of these creative opportunities to integrate unexpected stimulus into the lesson.
It does bring up the question, I think, too, of the relative issues that come up with audio and video, and there is such a preference or a prevalence to think of visual first when you think about what it is. But in a lot of cases, and
It's
you know,
audio.
really the audio carries the day in so much of our interactions, and I think, you know, familiarizing students very first from how do you mute yourself. When should you mute yourself and when should you unmute yourself? It applies to the instructor as well,
Right.
But working with sound is something that people don't often think about with this sort of push to the video, I think.
Okay, Sita and then Steve.
Steve was just took it away from me, but I was just going to say the mute button is a very powerful button. and I think that is part of the educating of you need to mute yourself. But there is also the unpredictability. I mean, I have taught online, expected to have great internet access, and then I'm going to Germany, a great country with infrastructure, but it turns out not exactly where I am. So then to have plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and communicate that early, as Joe pointed out, that's exactly it. Educating everyone involved, the administrators, the students, the teachers, the co-teachers, what you can expect, and all the things that, not all, but frequently going wrong things that should be on that list too. And I think I fully support your plug for Zoom. I think it's a much better platform, and anybody can use it from anywhere. I mean, that's how we do our study abroad interviews with our local staff. I give them a link. They don't need any technology on their end. They come in, and before we did that, we used Google instead of Skype because we found Google not necessarily more stable, but on Skype everybody's big, but on Google you have multiple people, and whoever's talking shows up big on your screen. It makes a difference.
It's very
Who are you
disconcerting
looking
too.
at?
Yeah.
Are you looking at the person who's actually typing, or are you looking at, you know, Joe who's not talking right now, and then you get confused. So whatever the technology can offer to make it more like you're having an act, like I turn my head to you if I talk to you, I turn my head to you. So if the technology is supporting that, it just makes it much nicer.
I was just gonna say, we use Zoom as well, and in fact, because of the scare, we're always scared that something's gonna break down, so we also have a backup phone in the room. So worst case scenario, we'll just call the guy. and that's been working out pretty well. But I was wondering, when you guys do like a classroom to classroom, do you also film it and then put it online? And especially because if there's a student that's missing, I would imagine that makes it much more difficult because they can't really go to the office hours necessarily. Is that something that you do? And does the whiteboard also kind of maintain the thing? I've talked with Doceri, for example, recorded with that and then put it online. I just didn't know if that was a best practices as well.
Sure. We haven't institutionalized the practice of like mandatory classroom capture, but in our rooms we have, at least in the Columbia rooms, we have a push button recording feature which is part of the life-size platform. And so what that captures is everything that the cameras are capturing and whatever kind of presentation is being shared as well. So that after the class, and in some of our off time here, I can show you what this looks like if you'd like. You can actually toggle the views so that you can make one speaker bigger, you can make the computer bigger. So it's a dynamic playback. It's really great, but there are other solutions to do that too. But to your point, yes, that feature is possible, and you should think about whether or not that's something that you want to build into your design.
Yeah, we have a camera in the back and it films everything, and it works well, but I was just wondering, but that multi-view sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I think with the kind of classroom design that, or whatever that we've been using, another feature that if the student gets an Evernote account, they can you know, get a snapshot of the chalkboard, you know, and keep chalkboard snapshots, you know. So and if a student is absent, you know, they can, if it's in advance, they can arrange for somebody else to take snapshots or whatever and put them up.
I'm going to take on my role as the children and say we need to make sure that we are respecting the privacy of the students if we put things online. So for example, right now, we go filmed. How many of us signed over an agreement that we're okay with this being online? So I think that is a very important piece of our students if we want to protect the communications that they have in the classroom and allowing them to free speak really. So if we want that to happen, then we might not be able to put it online, or we might not be able to have everybody in the view of the camera. And so, not during the delivery part, but the second part, let's see, put it online.
And also, what is, you know, let's further unpack that. What does online mean? So if something's behind password protection, you have a little bit more FERPA kind of support. And if you're only making it available on the course site, you know, you have as many layers of protection as you can put behind it. But yes, you need to get clearance from the students first. And what does putting it online mean? Is it mean public visibility or just to the students? And these expectations should be set early on, absolutely.
And we only do it through the course itself. No, but I mean, that's,
I'm just saying
but that is
you know,
the
for those of you that are venturing
Think it through.
into it's an important thing to think
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
Because it is so easy to archive and think about, oh, great, I have it archived, let's use it again, right? And it can't be an afterthought, it has to be a forethought. So
Yeah.
you can get proper signing.
I just want to make a comment that I've been through renovations of rooms, and Tulane's an old campus. And so it is super challenging for those of you at campuses, like if you have like I had administrators like, okay, this is the room that we want to make, and it's just not ideal to do this. And one of the things is, like, I would just say, engage the specialist to help you convince them that that room is really not going to work for this ideal, or it is or this other room is going to work. It's like I think that's a huge consideration. Like in my own building, we have 14-foot ceilings, and we have a conference room with 14-foot ceilings, and you know, our director's like, we're going to turn this into a video conference room, and I'm already going, Tom, no, really, like, you don't. It's going to cost us a lot more, you know, to do this. You just got to know that ahead of time. I think those are really important aspects when you're going ahead with trying to think about it. And also, again, the fact that working with IT can be so frustrating with your tech departments. And they do not, they don't even think about the issues that we're facing with language instruction. And if you have like more traditional language instruction, there's a language lab. And they're like, oh, well, that's the language lab's, role, whereas if you're an area study center, they're not thinking of these factors that we need, these things that we need.
Yeah, an additional comment to you, Valerie, as someone who's just jumped into this, room design and how you sort of spatially organize your teaching becomes a whole different topic. And I wish I had known, well, we thought about it with the set of teaching, and so, but if you don't have experiences or actually try it out, it's hard to imagine how it's actually going to play out. So there's a whole bunch of things I would change about the room that you're going to see this afternoon. But yeah, so if you're doing this, spend time on that. For example, the Virginia campus, I think they're working off some kind of, what do you call it, a big pad, white pad for the instructor to write on. The instructor cannot stand because the cameras are positioned in a way that would capture his head. Like simple things like that. Anyway.
So just 2 comments. I mean, I'm really struck about the possibilities of a menu of technologies, right? I mean, so the high end versus the middle end that you've emphasized, but also then here you are in a classroom with one student at a different site on an iPad, and that can work. So different settings, different kinds of courses can utilize different forms of technology. I think that's a kind of big takeaway point, and to think through what it is one needs in one's own setting, right? But the second thing is about what to say to students, and I think another way to talk to students about distance learning is that is the advantage of connecting with students in your area of interest, in your field, nationally and internationally. So, or potentially internationally, right? So our students receive NAWAT from Mexico, and these kids are connecting with other kids, right, elsewhere, and with the native language instructors there, and then they go to the Yale. They went to the Yale Summer Institute, and they meet scholars and students from all around the country and internationally, and it is life transforming. And I think distance learning in many ways has the opportunity to provide a kind of bigger vision of a cohort of students. And we should probably convey that to students, to say this is one of the things that you can do through distance learning, is meet people at other campuses who share your interests and maybe your career interests too. So.
And I would say that it's important to make sure that we're thinking about an undergraduate population and a graduate population, that we're thinking about how to get them excited about graduate students typically have their own locations.
Right.
And our undergraduates, maybe.
So these are students who've done this are undergraduates, and it's been for a small group of life transforming about this experience of knowing there's a whole world out there, a world of scholars and other students who are doing what they are interested in doing. So it's kind of amazing. Megan?
So I think following up with that, also looking at, I think someone mentioned earlier, there's sometimes a stigma associated with faculty on teaching distance learning for language education. So I was wondering if anyone has best practice methods on talking with faculty prior to the classroom, or how to engage in, faculty training before they start teaching. Be interested in to hear people's perspectives on that.
And evaluation related to that, right? Because I think a lot of faculty are concerned that their student evaluations are going to come back criticizing the technology instead of capturing the quality of their teaching.
Well, I just, for what we've been doing so far, there's a prior to instruction, there's a week long, so like instruction is 8 weeks, but the faculty contracts are 9 weeks. So the first week is, prep time kinds of stuff. But what we've been doing a lot of, we spent a couple of summers on sort of the gadgets. How do you work with the gadgets and make them work and do what you want them to do? Technology part, and then we spent last summer talking more about the impacts of technology on classroom, this whole classroom management, classroom climate, and how to how to make it so that you're making it as communicative and participatory an experience for everybody as possible. So you know, it's the faculty learning from each other as they're doing.
No. I think that around the country, there are full professors who, meeting with a few of their own graduate students teaching some language. I know Ann Feldhouse in our department, full professor working, teaching Hindi to about 3 students in her office as an overload, not compensated. And I've talked with people like that. And partly, I think there would be a huge emotional payoff to be able to connect with graduate students doing important work around the country, the networking field. And that itself would be a big payment. For me, that's one of the funnest part of my week is with the graduate students in the advanced speech work. But I think that the faculty, especially older faculty, are afraid of the technology. And I think what would really happen, would help is if for a first year, a faculty member like that could be paired with somebody who's teaching that language somewhere else, where Blue Jeans is already working and you just get on your computer and call in, and then they see how it works, because for all the difficulties, it's not as difficult as many of them feel like it's going to be. And then they feel the payoff. They get to connect with all these.
And we have to remember, our students are used to this technology,
Yeah.
right? They're not put off so much by it.
Yeah.
Or not, at least as much as older traditional faculty.
I'd say teaching with technology, I mean, there's definitely a danger felt by some faculty probably, and there's also a really big opportunity that those who are positioned with, on the program administration side or the technology support side, or, I'm situated in our project doing research. I sat in the class of a Dutch instructor who was teaching at Yale for the first time ever, and brought his teaching methods, his own background from teaching in the Netherlands to the Yale classroom, and wouldn't have had any opportunity for classroom observation, for dialogue about teaching methods in different places, different pedagogies, without this sort of strange opportunity that distance teaching presented in having someone physically there, another person in the classroom watching and recording how resources were being used, how the classroom progressed through various activities and cycles, how different members of the class were participating and in what way, through what modalities, what tools, and so on. And he said having all that documented and taking notes on was fascinating. It wasn't meant to evaluate his instruction perhaps, but it did feed back into that. And then sort of zooming back out, I think I've had really positive experiences from our annual training workshops where you have faculty teaching very, very different languages who would have no other occasion to glimpse into each other's classes, talk about their approaches, their different assumptions about what is culture, what is language, how do we teach these things, what's the role of handwriting, what's the role of text in my classroom, without this kind of convenient excuse of teaching at a distance and the kind of interventions from the outside that mandates. So I don't know, I see a lot of opportunity there, but certainly some scary things too, because you do have to open your classroom.
I think to your point, before we go too far away from it, give them give potential faculty as many opportunities to play and to be exposed to people that are actually practicing this already. So if they're not on your campus, facilitate a way of getting them access to one of these distance courses already, so that they can see. It helps diffuse the tension to see somebody doing it well, obviously, right? So where you can afford those opportunities, present them to faculty as like an introductory, it's not that scary kind of opportunity, right? And then if you have enough control over the environment to have something like we have, where it's like an annual training workshop where we get the people together in the same place at the same time to demonstrate, to talk, and then to mentor new faculty, that's ideal, but it's not always possible, obviously, when you're talking about 2 or 3 people doing this for the first time.
But just to jump on that too, they'll say that using the same tools that we use for teaching in order to do professional development activities also is a really nice way for faculty to participate in a different role. I can be a student, and I'm in a workshop now using these distance technologies and can talk about or think about how to apply it to my classroom. So
courses. But it is my job as their supervisor to look at that and say, well, how does this course evaluation compare to other online course evaluations? And how does this face-to-face evaluation compare to other face-to-face evaluations? So that, just like if you're teaching a general education course where everybody being there from day one is a different thing than teaching a specialized graduate seminar where everybody is so excited to learn about this. So you have to take teaching evaluation in relation, and you have to communicate that with your staff that, yes, I know you're teaching an online course, and I know it's going to come out lower, and we're going to work through that. Also, I think it's important to establish that community, what David said, so that they know I'm not the strange person doing this thing. There's other people that are doing it that have the same struggles. And as a team, they start to get a voice on campus, and are starting to get heard, and are starting to be perceived as equal. And that's the part. You also have to make sure that your institutional structure is treating them as equal, so that your online instructors are not all adjuncts, but that there is actually online instructors who are full professors, who are associate professors, tenure track professors who are doing it, that you have a reward system for that. So if you're developing an online course, you're getting a course release because it takes more work than a face-to-face course. That we have the general Best Teacher of the Year award, but we also have a Best Online Course award. So having those kinds of incentives in your institutional structure teaches them that, hey, we appreciate what you're doing. And the other thing for those that are resistant to me is like, well, you have two choices here. You can either not teach or you can teach. You might not have students or you might have students. Those are your choices. So there's no way around it. This is the way that we're going to go. Plus, like I shared earlier, for us it's a cash cow. If we teach online in the summer, we get money back. So let's do it. And let's everybody get behind it, not just the adjunct who doesn't have a say, but everybody needs to be involved in this because it brings money back to our program.
Could I ask a follow-up question? How do you work with other departments? So when you're not the supervisor of that faculty, but you're sort of also trying to work with a chair who might be resistant or not understand the value that you're learning.
I do a lot of educating of my fellow faculty members about what my online teachers do. We have the Center for Language Teaching Advancement that does a lot of that educating as well. And our previous dean, 2 weeks ago we had an interim dean, but the last one that was actually put in place, she had a big focus on moving online education forward, but at the same time she looked at what is the culture in those programs, and then based on that decided which would be the best programs to get it started. So German, with me in there, was a good choice because there's somebody who buys into it. So let's start with that. We had a few other programs like that. We've hired people since then that were specialists. So they were people who already believed it, and then it sort of rippled out, and other people got behind it. And I think cluster hires was important as well, to hire sort of a team that is going to be so that they have friends. Everybody has friends.
David, you mentioned professional development, and we're also talking about creating a community. And I'm curious if anybody is hosting distance learning instructors from other institutions with whom they do not have a relationship. So for example, you're doing one of your training seminars, right, for your new instructors. Could FIU send one of our instructors who's interested in doing it to your week-long training institute? Or could we bring somebody from your team to FIU to train multiple? I mean, is there that level of resource sharing? Because I think, of course we have FIU online, but they're dealing with people in a very broad way. And I think there are very particular things about language teaching that have to be addressed.
Right.
And so what kinds of resource sharing, training opportunities are there out there?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I could give an encapsulating sort of view of that. I think the fact that all of us are here sitting together having this wonderful conversation is probably evidence that there's a lot of potential and possibility, and it's sort of for us to map as we go forward. I know that some of the professional organizations like IALT, Calico, and other sort of language teaching technology organizations will have open training webinars and gatherings and those kinds of things to do. We can organize, and thinking about organizing, other other types of derivative types of things. But there are a lot of organizations already out there, I think, that are doing some really interesting things. And lunch is coming up, and we can
Yeah, I don't know,
talk
like-
about
like-
it.
There is a consultancy
Definitely.
business out there.
Nickel Tickle, I don't know if they're doing
There's-
anything with
Yeah.
distant stuff.
Pardon me?
Nickel Tickle,
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
they're doing stuff with whatever. That
There's-
seems like a.
yeah, there's some
Also,
training.
LRCs have the summer workshops, and
Right.
they have webinars, and some of the webinars are archived, and so you can go to them. So
I
there's.
don't know, webinar isn't the, to me, the
Yeah.
webinars aren't the same as
Right.
like
But that's
being
what I'm saying.
with other
There's
people.
different- They have webinars, they have summer institutes, so
Yeah.
whatever.
I see that as a starting point. I mean, like Altech at the University of Colorado Boulder has a lot of really neat training opportunities that they do, some by distance and some, are inviting folks to come and participate directly. And so I think there's a lot of flexibility and possibility.
Could somebody sort of pull together a list of those? Because I have to say, Avery and I worked hard to try to find folks who could talk about pedagogy and professional training
Yeah.
and stuff for the workshop, because we didn't know where to go, right? And I think there are probably a lot of people around the table who also, if we wanted to have training, I mean, if one of our goals is to provide more professional development opportunities for native language instructors and distance learning pedagogy being part of that, we all need to know where to go, whether we can send everybody to yours in the summer, or whether we want to bring people to our campus. I don't know where to start.
Right.
I have some of
So-
those on my handout.
Yeah.
Can I ask Amber how you guys handle that in the CIC? How you guys handle professional development across institutions?
Yeah, we've looked at it at a couple points over the last few years of trying to do something centrally, and as we explored that, we kept getting some resistance about, well, but our campus does it this way, or we need to talk about the learning management system, and so it takes place on the campuses, and some of the campuses will have a 2 or 3 day program, and some of them really don't do a lot of formal training, but we haven't been able to land on anything centrally that was of interest to the campuses.
I'd certainly be happy to
Everyone gets-
contribute to a Google Doc. That's a good technology, right? Or something like that in terms of starting points. Yeah.
In an indigenous language.
Ah.
Yeah, okay, what
Well, I just had just a comment. I mean, when we started the Catchwell program, doing the distance education thing, we talked to our online office thinking that would be, and it's actually called online and distance education. And they said that we didn't qualify because
Right.
we were technically having a live instructor somewhere.
Right.
And so there was no help from that office. Is
That's-
that the way it is in other places too? Or?
Well, that's the expectation I run into so often with students. Oh, it's an online, it's distance learning. That must mean that there's no instructor, it's just such a common.
Yeah, the black box asynchronous course
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah.
And as MOOCs start to enter this conversation, that changes things dramatically too. But yeah, it's funny what triggers kind of unexpectedly change people's thinking about what online or distance teaching is. But yeah, we're coming from a very synchronous space. But I'd be interested. I mean, to hear, for instance, how people are doing this online, and if there are more asynchronous elements. But that's not what we're doing, and it doesn't sound like that's what there's some
No,
institutes.
no.
Yeah.
My understanding, again, I'm not a researcher, my understanding of the research about asynchronous language program kinds of things is that there's overwhelming evidence that it doesn't lead to proficiency gains of any measurable
Right.
kind.
And it's ineligible for class.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So-
It just doesn't get you very far.
All right, thank you all so much. Great. So now,